Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum. My name's Paul Thompson, and I'm director of the museum. I'd just like to introduce Bruce Nussbaum, who is assistant managing editor of BusinessWeek, and he's in charge of all coverage on design and innovation. And today is, for us, a very exciting time, because we're looking at a whole new series of design seminars based around the economic contribution that good design makes to companies. I think very often in design museums around the world, we tend to focus on the way things look and on the technical innovation that's associated with a particular product. But I think it's equally important for us design museums to remember that good design can actually create wealth, it can create jobs, and it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, the fact that it's beautiful and hugely commercially successful. As an observation, when design museums were actually first set up in the 19th century, they were intended very much as engines for commerce and commercial development. I think we tend to forget now that design museums had that function. The Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris actually was designed deliberately to look like a department store, so that visitors to the museum would come in, look at the wares on display, and be hopefully encouraged to then go and buy what Sèvres, the porcelain manufacturer, was currently producing. The V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum in London, was actually the first exhibits in that museum were from a trade fair, the Great Exhibition. They were deliberately brought in to create a museum that would stimulate economic wealth and raise design standards, because the British were worried that the French had such superb design skills and the Brits had great manufacturing skills, but their design was abysmal. And the whole idea was to try and stimulate, stimulate debate and to encourage better use of design. So today, we're very excited to have this, as I say, in the first of a series of lectures where we very consciously focus on the job creation, the wealth creation that good design can actually bring to companies. And we have a stellar lineup of both people from the design side and design within the corporate, within a particular company, to help us understand that contribution. So over to Bruce Nussbaum. Thank you very much indeed for offering to moderate this panel.
Thank you. Is this on? Did I do this without the podium? Can you hear me? Yes. Is it good? Okay. So this is the deal. We're totally unprepared, actually, for anything that's very structured. Today's the first day of summer. It's June 22. And it's a gorgeous day out, and we're all very laid back. So that's my preface. We're going to be very open for questions and discussion and whatever you really want to do. We have a great panel in terms of folks who know about design and business. So feel very free to, interact with us. From my perspective at BusinessWeek, I'll just give you a very brief rundown. I began covering design in, I guess, the early 90s or late 80s. I can't quite remember anymore. And it was really about aesthetics and product design. And it was wonderful and beautiful and terrific. And it still is, that part of design. But it is really, design itself has really evolved tremendously into what I would call design thinking. Other people have other names for it. Sometimes I call it a banana, because other people are uncomfortable with the term design. But what it really is a way of seeing things, a way of thinking about things, a way of dealing with business problems and business issues. I would go further and say that design thinking is actually a way of dealing with issues throughout society. And we could get into this a little bit later on. But I think in terms of whether it's Procter Gamble or Martha Stewart or BusinessWeek or our education system or our political system, there is a methodology that's now being formed and formalized called design thinking that I think will allow us to move forward in a very positive way. Having said that, I think we should bring it back now to the people who are here and ask them, I guess, to introduce themselves a little bit and come up here. Actually, why don't we just all come up here and be comfortable and sit down, introduce ourselves, and get going. Okay? I'm going to sit here.
Right.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that we are actually webcasting this performance.
Okay.
So it won't be quite as informal as you perhaps.
Okay.
There are millions of people.
There are millions of people. Right. Okay. Good. So let's go around this way.
Okay.
That's okay.
I'm Gael Towey. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia. And I spend my time, I'm actually really lucky. I'm one of the few sort of horizontal people in the company who go between the media side of what we do and the merchandising side of what we do. We have a publishing company, and we have 5 magazines. We have a television company. We have an internet division, and we have a merchandising division. In the past 2 years, I've spent a lot of time working on merchandising because we got a new president of merchandising, and she's been signing up a lot of licensing agreements. So we've been designing a lot of product. We're going to have 1,500 new products in Macy's in August. We have a new line with Safavea, which is a rug company, and a new lighting line as well. And that combined with our, and then we've also have a licensing agreement with Floor Tiles. So altogether, we have now a wonderful decorating business with all those licensing partners coming together with our furniture business. So we can create that home vision, which has been very fun to work on. And then our Kmart relationship continues, and we've been starting new magazines. We have a new magazine called Blueprint, which is for the younger reader. And we just keep on growing. I guess that's all I can say.
Good.
Claudia.
Claudia.
I'm Claudia Kotchka, and I'm the head of design for Procter Gamble, and we're a consumer products company, and we make probably something that you have in your home. Could be anything from Pantene to Olay to Pampers to Crest to Gillette, Venus razors, whatever. So my job at P&G is really to build design into the DNA of our company. Our company heritage is about product technology. All of our products really started with great breakthrough technology, and we will continue to have that, but we want to add design to that as a piece of really delighting consumers. When our CEO came in 2001, he said, we really, if we're going to really capture the hearts and minds of consumers around the world, we really need design. And design, again, not just because it's pretty, but design because it solves problems differently, looks at different ways to delight consumers. And so we're trying to build that into the DNA of the company. So it's been a journey. That's what I tell our folks all the time. It's still a journey. We're having a lot of fun with it. And for us, it's about really involving not just designers, but all of our counterparts in research and development, in marketing and market research, in sales, so in the process of design thinking. And it's absolutely fun. So they get very excited when they realize there are different ways to solve problems, different ways to look at opportunities. So that's my job, and I travel a lot.
So I'm Tim Brown from IDEO, and I travel a lot too. IDEO's actually been on really the journey that Bruce described at the beginning, going from a group of people that were, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, where essentially we were asked to, design a product that somebody had already kind of decided what it was going to be. They'd already kind of configured it. The technology existed, and we still did some pretty interesting kind of breakthrough things, like the first mouse for the Macintosh and the first laptop computer and things like that, which were breakthrough products at the time. But our principal contribution was really form, usability, manufacturability to some degree, things that product designers have done for a long time. But what we've seen over the last 25 years is this sort of steady evolution of the role of design thinkers to be involved further and further kind of upstream in the kind of innovation associated with new products and services and experiences. And so now, you know, most of our work, in fact, I mean, much more than 60-70% of our work, I think, is working with companies, helping them decide what to do, not just the doing of it. What is our new product going to be? What is our new service going to be? Where is that going to be? Where is that going to take us strategically? How's our brand and our product relate to each other? Things like that. And you know, that's all. The reason that's happened, the reason that's happened to designers is that design thinking leads to certain kinds of innovation that lead to economic growth. And they lead to successful economic growth, and it's an addition to the kind of portfolio of methods of growth that companies have traditionally used. You know, traditional technological R&D, or improvement of business processes. Design is a kind of another one of those kind of tools in the portfolio, if you will, tools in the toolbox. And so I think it's been a really interesting journey, and one that's going to continue. I think we're only at the beginning of formalizing that. Again, as Bruce mentioned, that the sort of formal, and I don't mean formalizing it in a way that takes the creativity out of it, because that would be kind of unfortunate if you did that. But formalizing it in the sense that it can become kind of replicable, and one can actually understand how much impact one is having with this approach. And I think it's going to take a long time yet before we get through that process, but I think it's a pretty interesting journey to be on.
It's true. I want to focus my first question with you, Claudia, because P&G and AG have been pioneers in adapting design. Big company, a non-tech company, a company not known for design, kind of absorbing it and taking it on and trying to build it into its DNA. How hard has it been to do that? And where have you had your key successes, and where are your major failures?
Ooh, Bruce.
I'm sorry. He gave me such a dirty look when I was at 50,000 feet, so I decided to be very rigorous, very hard.
How hard is it? I think it's hard just because we're so big, to be honest. I mean, when you've got a company of 130,000 people and you're trying to build something into the DNA, that's just going to take a lot of time. And so just size and scale alone, I think, is what makes it difficult. So that's really the hard part, rather than getting people to embrace it. Once people start to understand that design thinking is really for everyone and not just about designers, and it's a new, as Tim said, it's a new tool. They're very excited, and so people go, "This is great." New tools to help us win with consumers is something that they're all very excited about. Our biggest successes, I think, in any kind of change effort start with the businesses that are in trouble, okay? Because they're the first ones that want to embrace something new. And so when we first got started with it, that's, we kind of looked for, businesses that seemed open to new ideas because they were needing something new. And so I think that's probably typical in any kind of change effort. You start there, and probably the first group that embraced design and design thinking was our baby care division, Pampers. At the time, they were not doing as well in the marketplace as they needed to. They weren't delighting consumers. They were very focused on being, technical, and P&G very focused on, the absorbency of the product. Does the diaper leak? This is, that's what we're going to measure, and things like, fit and finish, and how does it look on the baby, and how does it feel, and how does it sound? And they're like, who cares about any of those kinds of things? And I think. So they were not winning, and so they said, all right, we'll try something new. So they were one of the first really to really start to adopt design. And I think probably in a lot of companies, it starts as aesthetics. It starts as aesthetics, and then it kind of grows to oh, we can use the methodology and the thinking and the kind of user observation to solve lots of problems beyond just, just the aesthetics. And so that's been one of our early successes, I think. In terms of failures, that's actually a really tough one. I'm sure we've had them. Honestly, I'm just trying to think in terms of trying to build design thinking in. I can't say that anyone has said no.
Let me just follow that up. My experience, at least at BusinessWeek, and as you all know, the media is going through its own meltdown, and business model is changing, and we're trying to introduce a lot of innovation, and basically going through a lot of what everyone else is going through in the country. There are certain, some of it is demographic. You could slice it demographically, but surprisingly, some of it is not. There are whole bunches of people who seem to be much more open to change and adapting and absorbing the lessons of design and the methodology of design, and lots of people who, resist it. There are some people who don't even like the word design. And in fact, I've just come to call it a banana when that happens. And it's particularly true, I think, of senior male CEOs around the country. They just get creepy. But be that as it may, it's not only senior male CEOs who get creeped out by the word design, although they seem to be very happy with the word vision when it's applied to them. And it's just as squishy and weird also, but there you go. They're all very happy with the word innovation, and sometimes it means the same things as design and sometimes not, and again, call it innovation, design, banana, whatever. Anyhow, what I'm trying to get back to, sorry, I'm still waking up this morning. Are there, within the large bureaucracy of P&G, are there particular groups or segments that seem to be more open to the message of design and others that are more resistant? Does it relate, in fact, to age or gender? Do you have any insights whatsoever as to where the resistance comes from, and how are you dealing with that?
I think it's just human nature, I think. So I don't think it has anything to do with age or gender or anything like that. I haven't seen that. I mean, our CEO is our biggest supporter of design. And so I haven't seen any difference like that. In fact, the group that we thought would be the least open to some new concept, like you said, design's kind of squishy. They don't actually know what it is. We thought it would be finance, and they've been fantastic. They've been great. Well, I'll tell you a story. They didn't start out that way. When I first took this job, I went into my finance manager, brand new finance manager, and I said, hi, here's my new job. You're gonna help me put together a budget, whatever. And he goes, what do you do? And I said, design. And he goes, design? I think isn't that the first thing we cut when we run out of money? He did. And I went, okay, Kevin. And so but that was great. At least he was honest. And I went, all right. So let me show you what design really is and how it builds the business. And I actually took in a measuring cup, and I took in a plastic measuring cup from Kmart, and I said, all right, I said, Kevin, I said, how would you make this better? And he said, well, I don't think you can make it better. I think, this is a measuring cup, and it works, and, it's fine, and it's, 99 cents or whatever at Kmart, and it's perfect. And then I showed him the OXO measuring cup, and I said, here you go. And I said, take a look at this, and it's wonderful, and it's got, it adds value because you can use it. I said, the designers looked and said, yeah, it pours. But they watched people using a measuring cup, and they said, they would hold it up and look it down, try to figure out how much is in it. And so they made it so you can look down and see exactly what's in it without lifting it up. And I said, and he went, this is fantastic. This is brilliant. I said, that's design. And he went, okay, I'm on. So I'm on board. So, that it just takes, to me, just a couple case studies like that. And when people start to understand what design is and does, they get it. And so finance has been great. So I wouldn't say there's any trend that way. I don't know, maybe you guys, have you seen
I was going to say, I think one of the, where you get resistance, it's because of lack of understanding.
Right.
And I think, well, this is a great example of trying to, of trying to find ways to articulate what design does for people, and what design thinking is and what design process is, so that they're more comfortable with it. Because let's face it, we all go through an education system which today does a good job of teaching us analytical thinking and logical thinking and narrative thinking. doesn't teach us design thinking. I mean, for the most part,
No.
people's high school education, their elementary school education, and yet it's a perfectly legitimate form of tackling problems and doing things in the world. And you know, and until we can find a way to, you know, in some places do it better than others, and some parts of the country do it better than others, but until we can kind of weave that into everybody's education, people are going to feel uncomfortable with it because it's new, they don't understand it, it seems mysterious, it seems magical. I mean, how do these kind of weird creative people with funny haircuts suddenly come up with these ideas? People are uncomfortable when they think of it that way, and when you take away some of the mystery and you show them the process and you explain how simple it kind of is if you do the right stuff, then you're more likely to get people engaged, I think.
And that's why design education should include presentation skills, which also doesn't really happen in art schools. The whole idea that you have to explain what you're doing and be kind of on the same level with everybody. That, you know, one of the great things about design is that it forces you to be as good as your editor, or as smart as your editor, or as smart as your buyer, or whoever it is that you're interacting with, because you have to get into their head in order to convince them that you're going in the right direction.
That's why the core of design thinking, in my opinion, is empathy.
Yes.
Yeah. It's right at the very, very center of design thinking, and whether that's done intuitively or very explicitly through ethnographic research or observation or whatever, being able to kind of empathize with the people that you're collaborating with and designing for is kind of absolutely the first step. And I think you're right. A surprising number of designers actually have a hard time with that, because if they were really good at it, they would get better at communicating their ideas.
Yeah, communication.
Most designers I know have a hard time articulating, but they're empathetic. They just can't get it out.
Well, they're visual.
You know,
they're very visual. You know, they're visual thinkers, and they process visually. And you know, one of the things that I say a lot is, you know, designers, you know, see the world, hear the world through their eyes. And so that, you know, so to try to, in a world of business, at least for us, where it's verbal, it's a very verbal culture, either written or, like you said, presentation skills, and they're visual. And so we're trying to actually get P&G to be more visual, so that, you know, that'll help us. And
they also listen.
Designers.
I think one of the great skills, I think part of the empathy is that, you know, we live in a society, certainly in New York, we're all outputting, and we don't listen very well anymore, if we ever did. And I think part of the whole process of design, part of the process of connecting and being empathetic is actually, you know, shutting up and listening and seeing, really seeing. So it sounds bizarre, but that's become a very valued skill. And I think the rush to, or the need to connect to consumers is really at the heart, I should be posing this as a question, but we all know, is really at the heart of why design is increasingly popular within the business community. Isn't that so?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Right. People ask me that. You know, you're at BusinessWeek. You know, why is design so, you know, so hot today? You know, what is it exactly? And I actually do think that, you know, this ever-present desire to be close to the consumer and customer or patient or whatever is now much greater, because our culture has changed and people are now demanding, listen to me. And how do you do that? And design has a set of tools and values to do that. So Martha Stewart and design. We were talking a little bit earlier about experience and intuition as part of design, as in addition to process. Can you talk a little bit about how that works for you with Martha and within the whole business environment?
That sounds like two questions. You asked me earlier about, you know, how do Martha and I intuit from one another in terms of, you know, direction of the company and working day to day. That's one question that I hadn't really thought about until you asked me it. But that's only one aspect of kind of being in touch with the customer and having some kind of intuitive understanding of what their needs are for the home. And I really believe that you have to be the customer yourself. And I think that that's a lot, that has been a lot of our success at Martha Stewart. But I also think that we're in this incredibly unique situation where the magazine and the television show can really inform us so much about what people are thinking and what people want to know about. And also it explores this sort of Martha Stewart aesthetic of what we love and what we look like and how we act. And that way, the merchandising part of designing products can come out of that learning and out of that communication because of reading, because of TV. And so that, and it kind of helps that you have this very clear overall mission that we're a how-to company. And that can really drive everything that you do. You know, it sounds really like a simple idea, but that idea kind of pervades every choice that you make. So when you are making a product, the fact that it works is you know, primary. And also, when you're thinking about a product and how it looks on the shelf and how it's presented, it has to be that combination of products that is the most practical and workable. So if you're doing kitchen utensils, it has to be what you really want to have in your drawers and need to have in your drawers. And that gets so informed by the fact that we have, you know, we do a third of our output from our content is really recipes. And we know what recipes are being searched because we follow that through our internet. We know what people are talking about on message boards, and we get 1 million pieces of mail, most of which start with "Dear Martha," a year. So there's this unbelievable, you know, amount of information coming into us, which really helps us formulate what's going out there.
There's just tons of discussion now about social networking and social media. What you're describing here is kind of a conversation that you're having with your audience that both informs you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Are you doing this, how does this, I mean, are you doing it in a very deliberate strategy, or is this something that sort of happened over the years that you're...
I think it's been very evolutionary. It has happened over the years. You know, we, like many magazines, test stories. You know that you have there's a kind of an online testing system where people tell you what their favorite stories are. They rate the stories for you. So we know that stories on organization always rate in the 90s. We know that chicken recipes are downloaded more than anything else. We know that at Thanksgiving, Turkey 101, which is a story that we did probably 7 years ago, is still the most downloaded story, you know.
That's great.
So, you know, and then you say to yourself, well, what am I going to make in terms of product? Well, turkey pans, you know, obviously chicken roasters. It's so clear. And we just, you know, I think that the communication within the company, which is a little bit what you were talking about, is so for a company like ours that's growing so much. We're now over 700 people. Having that inner communication where everybody knows this stuff and keeping that flow so that people know one another is a huge effort. I just started having a design meeting and I disallowed any business people to come, where I put together all the art directors from the magazine and all the product design directors and our internet creative director, so that the designers would have their own little place to talk to one another and exchange their ideas and, you know, circulate you know, pictures from the product that were taken or pictures from a magazine story and talk to each other. And so that kind of making sure that that flow is happening within your company is incredibly important.
Now, how about you and Martha?
You know, I was explaining to Bruce that there are a couple of us who call ourselves sort of intuitive understanding, I guess. You don't get a lot of time with Martha, but there are some people where you just can have a sentence or a couple sentences and you sort of know exactly what she's thinking and it can help you. And also we've known each other for so long. I mean, known Martha. I met her originally in Clarkson Potter Publishers, where I was the art director. So we've known each other for over 20 years. So there is a lot of intuitive understanding and a lot of faith and trust, I think, because, you know, we don't always agree, but there are also a lot of business. You know, Martha, she is a perfectionist in many ways, and people talk about that. What she just wants is the best. She wants the best of everything, and sometimes that's not possible, you know. and you have
the one that tells her that.
Yes.
High turnover in that job.
You know, the price is not going to be right, or, you know, there's this whole sort of balancing act, and there's the give and take of the marketplace, and this person who has this incredible vision, and that's how it goes.
Yes. There is something fascinating to me about the creative relationship between, let's just say, you know, the Steve Jobs, Johnny Ive, you know, your relationship to Martha Stewart. In a lot of, you know, AG, in many institutions, in a lot of organizations, you have that. And there's something totally creative and magical about it, and incredibly productive. And beyond that, you know, it's one of these boxes that we talk about, intuition, experience, reading someone's face, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something very, very important, very key, and it's also very designy, creative. I'm looking at you now because you have more experience. You've got to deny all this, right? That it doesn't really.
No, I mean, clearly exists, because they're all three good examples of where that's worked really well for an organization. But I think it's not the only model that exists.
Exactly.
And, you know, I mean, you know, and I think it exists where you've got somebody at the top of a company who really does have good intuitions about design and believes in the power of design to make a difference to their company, and is willing to get enough involved in it that you can have that kind of intuitive relationship with the people who are actually doing the job, who are actually the creative people doing the job.
And that person can also spur the outside people to think differently.
Yeah.
You know, that's a way that Martha, I think, has had a huge impact on people who don't want to or afraid to think of creatively. You know, in our Kmart situation, way back at the beginning, Kmart really wanted us to just be a regular licensing partner and sign on to, you know, all the ugly colors that they were already selling, and Martha refused. But millions and millions and millions, in fact, billions of dollars are tied up in those decisions. So of course they're going to be afraid to not sell that horrible maroon and hunter green. You know, and so when Martha says to them, but I want to sell yellow towels, and they say, but yellow's never sold. She said, well, it's because it's not the right yellow. You know, for her, that definition is very fine, just like for any designer. Yeah. But it takes somebody of her stature to convince somebody who has to spend $1 billion to actually take that risk. And it's a huge risk for these big companies, because it's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that turns out to be often what our role is. My role is we get to work with a lot of companies that don't necessarily always have that level of kind of creative leadership right at the top. And we get to work with some, and it's wonderful, but many don't. And you know, I think part of our role is to help give those organizations the confidence to make those decisions based on what we've done elsewhere in the world before. You know, to go back to a point that Claudia made earlier on, it often takes a company that's sort of in a bit of trouble, or clearly sees an obstacle in front of them to want to listen in that way. And I'm always much more interested when companies come and they've got real issues to deal with than the ones who are kind of bombing along quite happily and very successful. They're usually not the best ones to talk to.
If you cannot convince the person at the top, whether it's in a business unit or top of the corporation, what are the chances of eventual success?
Very low.
Very low.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some organizations which are sort of decentralized enough that good things can happen anyway. The tech companies, surprisingly enough, are often like that. Or you've got companies where another part of the organization, like the R&D group, for instance, may be very powerful and may be able to get things to happen. But in general, if the kind of business leader for the piece of the business you're trying to tackle, whether it be a business unit or the whole company, isn't willing to listen, there are so many things that become impossible to make happen. Because so much about design, particularly when it's involved in innovation, particularly when you're talking about bringing new things out into the world, anything that's truly innovative often disrupts the business model in some way. So there's huge risks involved. Secondly, you're having to make really big investment decisions long before you have any real data. I mean, you can't market research things when they're really early on and when they're really disruptive, because often consumers can't really tell you how they're going to react anyhow.
Yeah.
So you're having to make kind of big leaps of faith, and you've generally got to be at some pretty high place in an organization to be able to make those leaps of faith without risking your whole career. And it's unreasonable to expect people low down in organizations to make those kinds of decisions. They can't. It's too dangerous for them, too risky for them. So I would say without buy-in from senior business leaders, the chances of anything very innovative happening very slim.
Yeah. Claudia, one of the things that really amazes me at P&G is I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of the mixing of products. That you'd have this, or Mr. Clean was here, and then you have all these other things. And over the last couple of years, you see these new things coming out that sort of mix. You have Mr. Clean here doing this or that or whatever and they're essentially new things that are an integration of traditional things. And just projecting from what I see at BusinessWeek in terms of silos, it's so hard to do that, to bring down those silos, to have people work together, to actually take a product here, a product there, come up with something new. How did that happen? And did it happen from top down? Did you have to break legs, or what?
No, you asked for something that's tough. That is tough. I would say that's actually one of our biggest challenges inside P&G is getting the business units to cross and talk to each other. Not because they don't want to, but they're just so busy with whatever it is they're doing, and so the concept of, gee, maybe we should, put, an example is, put Febreze and Tide. Those are actually two different business units, all right, to Tide with a touch of Febreze. And so, so that actually is very hard. I would say that's one of the hardest things we have to do. And again, it's not for lack of,
how do you do it?
It takes a business leader. Okay, I'm going to go back to Tim. It takes a business leader who said, we're going to do this, we're going to make this happen.
On top of the two business units?
Yeah, somewhere very senior in the organization, yes. In one of the business units to say, we're going to figure this out, we're going to make it happen, and push it through. That's exactly what it takes. You can't get people in the organization kind of in the middle. It's too hard. Mm-hmm. You've got to get someone senior who says, well, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to do this. Because they are risks. People go, well, can you put Febreze in Tide? I don't know. And can you figure this out? And will it make a difference? And does it make the product great? And so that's a lot of technical work. And so who's going to invest the technical time into, putting two brands together and making sure that, the consumer gets something that's truly fabulous? And so somebody's got to make an investment in that, and so it takes someone very senior to do that.
One of the great opportunities, I think, for design thinking in organizations is actually to be the catalyst that causes those kinds of connections to get made. I think because as designers we tend to go start with the world, start with users and consumers and figure out what's right for them, and then work back to the business. Yeah. You very often come up with the solutions that don't fit neatly into the silos, and they're often huge opportunities. They're often the biggest opportunities, and I think that's where design can be really disruptive, particularly in large companies. Is to come up with those solutions. I mean, think about things like the iPod, which was a convergence product, and you're seeing it in technology a lot. You're seeing it in a lot of fields where the really big ideas happen by connecting pieces of businesses together. Sometimes only on the inside, sometimes with other partners, and coming up with new solutions that really make sense for people. That's incredibly disruptive and catalytic and creates huge amounts of growth. And its design's got that ability to kind of envisage those things and justify them based on what we understand about the world. Yes. And so, yes, it's incredibly hard. It's then very hard to convince businesses to actually kind of reconfigure themselves in order to be able to bring those to the market. But at least design has got this kind of very powerful position to actually kind of throw up those kinds of those kinds of opportunities. And I think ultimately, perhaps, it's where we can make the biggest contribution. And it's why I think, as designers, we've got to be able to work kind of outside the system to some degree. I mean, we have to be able to find ways of of creating those insights and kind of working outside the kind of strict structure of the business. I mean, whether it's around things like sustainability, which today is a subject that as designers, most designers are concerned with. Some designers are spending a lot of their time on, yet most businesses are not yet very well configured around that as an issue. We have to kind of cut across. Things like that. I mean, are the place where we can, I think, where we can make a huge impact, but economically, ultimately, as well as socially and culturally.
Good.
We found ourselves in the middle of this very thing that you're describing, because we work with in our Macy's launch, for example. In Macy's, they're all divided up into these little pods. And when you walk the floor of Macy's, you can see what the pods are, because everything's merchandised in its own little section. And that's not how the consumer lives. The consumer lives with all of it in their kitchen or in their bedroom or in their home. And our natural way of thinking about it is to put it all together, because we have this editorial way of thinking. Yes. And I think that because we grew up as an editorial company, we think editorially. We think in terms of what's the ultimate need in the end. So our designers are the one group of people that flow through the entire Macy's organization. And many of them don't talk to each other. They talk to us, and then we talk back to them. So we become this connecting thread.
Integrative.
That has kind of forced them to get together. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where I've called a meeting just about photography, something as simple as that. They all take the same photograph over and over again because they're in different divisions. It's bizarre. Why would you want to spend the money and the time? And I'm saying to them, I don't want to make this bed 15 times. Can we make it once and make one picture for all of you? And they say to me, thank you. We've never all been in the room together, which is remarkable. But we've been able to make in Macy's more of a shop-in-shop situation where the pots and pans buyer and the utensil buyer and the buyer for dinnerware are all together, and they've never been all together before. And it's such a Williams-Sonoma kind of look and feel. You would think, it's not as though it's not out there.
Right.
You would think that would be something that would be intuitive to create, but it's taken us to really force that to come together, and it's been a great experience in that way.
You basically played the role of, designer and the design function to Macy's. That's quite
great.
Fascinating.
That reminds me, BusinessWeek did a fabulous story on Apple retail, and it talked about, and this goes back to design thinking. They're such a design thinking company, how when they did their first prototype of their retail store, they organized it the way they were organized. Here's our product line here, here's our product line here, here's our product line here, and they came in and found out this is not how people want to shop. This is not how people view Apple. This is how we think. And so I give them so much credit. They tore it down and built a new one and said, this is, we're going to make this for the consumer, for the shopper, so that when they come in, they can experience the brand the way they want to experience it. And that to me is just a great example of design thinking in terms of, tear down the walls that we see and look at it from the consumer's point of view. And it was one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
Did Apple do that, or did they have an outside group do that, or how did that happen?
They did that. They did that
themselves. Fascinating. That's really good. Should we open this up and take some questions now, or how does that feel? Does that feel okay?
Sounds good.
Okay with me?
Touchy-feely? Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to ask a question because I was just reading an article by Malcolm Gladwell, and I was wondering, as designers, and also you're involved in the marketplace and making money, do you pay a lot of attention to fads, whether it's the fad of the Wallaby or the iPod or the new little plastic sandals that kids are having, and how much attention do you pay to that, and how do you attribute to that good design, or what do you attribute to the fact that something all of a sudden just grows and becomes this great fad?
That's like a good one for you, Gail.
No, we don't pay attention to fads. I think that designers sense change by some kind of weird osmosis. So from a surface design point of view or something like that, or a shape point of view, you just evolve. But our own, we like the modern classic. That's kind of what we like. And I think that people do want to live simply and cleanly in an organized manner, and they want things to go together, and they want things to be practical and useful, and that's kind of our flow. I wouldn't call the iPod a fad.
No.
I would call it a revolution. So whereas what we do is we take these very classic things that everybody lives with every day, and we make sure that they're beautiful and functional.
All of this operates on so many different levels. I mean, I think certainly as a sort of involved in the sorts of things that we do, we take rather less notice of what your mom might think of as kind of fashion fads or fashion trends, but we tend to take quite a lot of notice of things that we think are underlying shifts, particularly social shifts that are often associated with technology. So, Bruce mentioned social media earlier. There's a technology that's enabling a social shift in the way that we communicate and the way that we collaborate that can't help but have enormous implications. And as you start to kind of extrapolate those out and start to think about them, one can start to imagine sort of completely new possibilities and start to imagine when they're going to happen. And that's the trick for for those of us that are designing, particularly with technology, is that we don't want to be futurists. We can't be futurists because, apart from anything else, they're normally wrong anyway as to when this stuff. But you can, by combining a deep understanding of people and a reasonably good understanding of technology, you can start to imagine when certain things might become possible, and you can start to work towards those. And that's really important because the first people to get to YouTube, the first people to get to Google, they do pretty well out of it, right? And massive amounts of wealth can come from understanding that and getting it right and being the people to get it right. So you have to be thinking about, what are these major shifts and drivers? But as I say, we tend to be more interesting ones that I think have got a social component to them,
Cultural
trends,
component,
and
the why,
or
the why behind it,
component.
right? Yeah, what's driving it? I would agree with that.
I'll admit to being the most superficial of all the people up here. I love fads. They bubble up. They're constant. There's a certain organism. They're always there, and they're always surprising. And they very often, but not always, reflect something deeper underneath it. Even though it's hard to get the connection. I was out in Portland, Oregon recently. I have some family out there, and everyone under 30 is wearing, forest green, or some grays or whatever, and it has everything to do with sustainability. But last year that was not true. This year it is absolutely true. You can't go, if you go into the city wearing this, they throw you out. You have to wear forest green. But there is something really, truly, deeply going on under there. And there are other things going on in Portland that are completely ridiculous and that have no deeper social meaning. But, they're all fascinating to me. Language fads, It is what it is. This is a ridiculous statement, right? I hear it all the time now. It is what it is. What is that? It's a weird, it's fatalistic, it's sort of descriptive. It is, it is what it is. But it's bopping around New York, and, it is what it is. Fascinating. Sorry, superficial. Next question.
You guys have spoken a little bit about the resistance you receive within businesses, and I'm a designer. I go to design school, and I feel like there's actually a lot of resistance from designers as well when it comes to design thinking. Like they don't want to think outside of the final product, or let's say you're an illustrator, you just want to think of that, or you want to think of the product, and you can't really go beyond that and think in terms of design thinking. So I was wondering if you guys have felt this type of resistance within the design community as well.
I would say that it's It's a huge challenge. I mean, I went through classical art school education, but was always fascinated by the things on the edges of design and the connections between design and other disciplines. Many people go into that kind of form of education because they really just care about the particular discipline, whatever it might be, whether it's industrial design or furniture or textiles or fashion or whatever it is, and they're not necessarily all that interested in things that connect to it. And there's no doubt that design thinking to be effective is actually a very interdisciplinary activity. And so what I'm seeing is not so much, or what I'm worried about actually, in terms of you know, as a kind of classically trained designer, is that we may actually lose control of design thinking to all of the people who are passionate about it, often coming from other disciplines. So, you know, today I get more invitations from business schools and engineering schools and, all kinds of educational institutions to come and talk about design thinking. Huge amount of interest, and you know, we get literally thousands of applications a year from people who are passionately interested in getting involved in design, who haven't had classical design training, and we now have something like 40 or 50 disciplines inside of our IDEO, and only, you know, a half dozen of them are kind of traditionally recognized design disciplines of kind of architecture and graphic design, industrial design. So it's kind of blossoming out in a really sort of almost uncontrollable way at the moment, and that's great. And I think it's going to allow design thinking to have a bigger impact on business and on the world. But the problem with that is there's a piece of design thinking which is about how you really make things, and how you really visualize things and bring powerful ideas into the world through this kind of skills that designers have that we might start to lose, which was, you know, obviously kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. So I'm a little nervous, and I don't even know what the right answer is as to how to get that right, to get that balance, and how far design schools need to go to sort of embrace this more kind of interdisciplinary approach to design without losing that, you know, that sort of kind of set of intuitions and craft that comes from, you know, years in a studio doing your, studying your discipline. It's not simple. The answer is not simple, and, you know, different schools are beginning to experiment with it in different ways. I think there's a really significant role for a difference between undergraduate and graduate education, and that's still sorting itself out and sorting itself out differently in different countries as well, which is a bit weird, you know. I think if this current kind of wave of design thinking and innovation is going to turn into a fad, one of the reasons why it would do that is because somehow the educational institutions don't catch up and can't figure out how to kind of take it to the next level. I do think some of these new institutions that are beginning to emerge, like the D School at Stanford, are kind of interesting additions to the kind of current kind of set of institutions. But I think the next 10 years is really important for that. I think there needs to be some really kind of quite radical thinking. I think this institution is one that can help lead that. There are other institutions that can help lead it, because I think we need some new ideas.
I would say I think it's a great question, because we're teaching design thinking to our business leaders and the multidisciplinary leadership teams. And when we first started doing that, and we make them go through an experience. Okay, we have them, brainstorm, prototype, user observation. I mean, everything. It's really fun to watch, the business presidents prototyping, with the duct tape. And but anyway, when we started doing that, I think some of our internal design team were worried. Gee, are they going to need me anymore? Are they going to? And what we found was the exact opposite. All right. Once they experienced design thinking and they realized the power of design thinking for so many different business problems. Because actually, when we have them come in, we have them work on their business strategy. They're actually not designing an object. And so they realize the power behind this, but they also realize I've got people on my team who have 15, 20 years experience in this methodology, in this thinking. And so they become more valuable. So rather than people saying, "Oh, I don't need them anymore, I can do this," what they say is, "Oh no, wow, I've got some experts who can help me and my team do this." And so we've found that to be actually hugely positive. and the kind of fear that people had in the beginning was not there. So we're actually very excited about that.
I think creating that mutual respect across the business and the design parts of your business is really, really important. And I also think that you're right about education. Designers are spending, and art students are spending too much time in studio classes and not enough time in English class and history class, and they're also not spending enough time in these in more team kind of projects, because then when they get to work, when they come to work for us, they're not used to working in a team setting. They're used to working alone, and it's very hard for them, and they think that they're somehow having their design prerogatives be taken away from them in some way, and yet we are in this incredibly social, wonderfully social business, and the collaboration is the fun part.
Yep.
You know, and it's why the product can reach the market ultimately.
I think from what I understand, there's a little bit of a civil war going on within the design community. You have people complain that there are schools that are graduating people in design who spend no time in studio and don't know how to make anything, but they're great in grand strategy. And then you hear the opposite. You know, people are spending all their time in traditional studio and they know how to do things alone and give beautiful form, but they don't know how to work in teams, and they can't abstract, you know, and they can't, you know, deal in a methodology. And this sort of, you know, has to be worked out. There's probably room for all of it, and there's certainly not enough of any of it.
I think design's one of those places, particularly as it has got so much more complex now, it's much more collaborative and dealing with more complex systems. It's probably one of those fields where, you know, there's a strong argument for not thinking about education in the traditional sense of 4 or 6 or 7 years of college, then go and have the rest of your professional career. I mean, you know, certainly at IDEO, you know, we have a lot of very smart people come and join us out of college, but we don't think that their education's even half over when they come to us, and whether they continue to learn through us, or whether, as many of them do, spend some years with us and then go off and get some other form of education, and either come back to us or go and do something else. You know, I think design's so complex. It's ridiculous to expect to get it all in a 4-year or a 6-year educational experience.
That's right.
And I think, you know, we need to set design up to think about kind of whole career-based learning in different kinds of ways. I mean, you know, I think there are very bright kids, for instance, who go through liberal arts educations, find actually that the design would be the right thing for them, ought to be able to go and learn how to do the studio stuff later on. And you know, they don't necessarily, I mean, they shouldn't have to have figured all that out. I mean, I have a daughter right now, she's interested in design, she's 16, which is just at that moment of having to make choices. And it's actually, I mean, you know, even though I went through it all, I'm finding it really hard, you know, working with her to figure out what the right thing is to do for her, and what the right kind of route to take. And so I think we need to give people a chance to kind of continue to discover as they go on through their careers.
It sounds like it means companies also need to change the way they are structured, because they're responsible for the continuing education of the people who are working there.
Yeah, that's very true.
Which is what you're doing.
Right, we are.
Although I suspect that, you know, given the meltdown in business models, less and less education and training and mentoring is happening in a lot of industries, as opposed to more and more, which is required. Here to see.
Many of the schools are really the problem, because they're not set up. The faculty do not collaborate. They're not rewarded for doing things together. I think this has to start at a much lower level. Perhaps this is true in high school, I don't even know, but there are so many silos in college, it's almost impossible to get faculty to collaborate, because most faculty, especially in urban schools, are adjunct. They're not full-time faculty. They don't get together ever to say, what is our vision? What are we trying to produce here?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that's sort of going on at the D School, collaborative teaching and new ways of teaching. Some of it's going on at Columbia also. They're sort of experimenting, but it's still at the experimental stage.
And it's beginning to, I mean, I'm seeing some evidence of it happening in the art schools at CCA in San Francisco. It's one that I'm on the board of. Yves Behar, who's the professor of industrial design, is actually doing very good. It's all adjunct staff, yet he gets that group together to collaborate on a regular basis. They do projects with companies and with other. Actually, they work with Berkeley. I mean, we're starting the same thing up in Toronto with the Rotman School of Business is working with OCAD, the design school, and they're doing projects together. The RISD Brown thing's been going on for years. I mean, you know, there are examples of it going on around the country,
Right.
but they're too few. They're too few.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the top design schools are doing it. I mean, I look at, you know, IIT, University of Cincinnati, they're all, from what I can see, very collaborative across disciplines, because they've figured out that that's really critical to success.
Well, I think Regis is right. I mean, the structure of universities and colleges is not well set up to encourage that kind of collaboration.
No, it's not
hard
set
work
up for
for everybody that
that.
wants
You
to
have
do
to
it. It's pretty
force
hard
it. You
work.
got to get a dean who says this is important and I'm going to make it happen.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Some more questions? Over here, we'll get them all.
Consumer research is obviously important to design. And I'm just wondering, there's also, I believe, a certain tension between designers and consumer research. And I'm wondering how consumer research processes have changed to sort of ameliorate that tension at times and lend a bit more predictability as to product design and product launch.
Oh, that's a really great question. There's a lot of tension. I think P&G, we love data, all right? And I mean, we just love data. And I think that, as Tim said, in the beginning when you're doing, you know, observation and whatever, I mean, that part we can go in and do observation, and come up with great ideas. The part where we can get stuck is when you've got an idea, but as you said, if it's something disruptive or something different, you can't always get data before you have to make a big investment in terms of, you know, you just kind of have to call it and go. And that's the part, I think, that's hard for companies, at least for us, because we like to have the data before we make a big investment. We can't do that. The more disruptive it is. And the designers are, because they're so used to working with their intuition, they go, well, this is great, you know, this is great. And the business leader's going, how do I know this is great? You know, it's like, we know this is great, you know, and even the whole team, you know, even with the other functions, they're like, we know this is great. Very tough, and I don't think we've solved that. And if someone can solve that, that would be
Don't you have
fabulous.
sort of beta launches that are less expensive than a massive launch, and sort of, you know, almost somewhere between prototype and massive launch, some stage where you can get more data as you sort of roll it out and scale it?
We definitely do that. What kills us, it's not even, to me, so much the dollars, because we can do that, you know, do things not all that expensively. It's the committing the people and the time. You know, it's like we have so many things on our plate, and so somebody's got to make the call. I'm going to take a whole team, and I'm going to send them off and have them go, you know, work on this. That's what kills us. It's the people, getting the people resources focused on it rather than the dollars.
That's why if you live in the world of startups, which we do some of the time, that problem just never comes up because if you're a startup, your idea may change 50 times between the day you get funded and the year you get something out of the marketplace. But you know you're going to put something out there, otherwise you're dead, right? I mean, and so that choice issue is not really. I mean, sometimes it's about editing down. Particularly I think in the technology world where a lot of startups suffer from trying to put too much out at the same time. But there's that commitment to launch, which is an essential part of being a startup. And so the kind of research question doesn't come up as often, if ever, in fact. What we've had to do is certainly to help ourselves is we've sort of had to get our own understanding, sort of slightly deeper understanding about of the whole world of research. I think there's a tendency amongst designers anyway to think it's all one thing, and it's not one thing. It's a very sophisticated kind of science, if you will, and it serves different purposes, and you use the tools differently depending where you are in the process. So at the beginning, when you're interested in inspiration, these forms of kind of anthropological, ethnographic, kind of observational research are great because you're just looking for a source of ideas. You're not looking for any kind of sense of how big the idea is, and that's really when I think where the big shift has been in the last 5 or 10 years has been the sort of opening up of that form of research. Yeah. But then there are forms of research which help kind of improve your ideas and kind of start to give you a sense of whether they make sense. And they're slightly different, and that's where you start to get into the beginnings of some of the sort of more traditional forms of use of consumer research. And then there's the form of research which tells you how big your idea is, and the sort of what I would think of as kind of validation of ideas. And that's where you definitely are in the science of kind of large scale consumer research. And once you've got an idea to the point where you are interested in validating it, then that's the right kind of research to do. But don't try and do that kind of research when you don't know what your idea is yet. Yeah. And so we just we've just tried to get a little bit more sophisticated in our understanding and know where we can play a role, and where we need other organizations or our clients, whatever, to play a role.
I would love to hear how you guys do that, because it's a tough one for us. And
it's a tough one for us too, and it's certainly a tough one from the design perspective. We do a lot of cover testing. I'm sure you do that at Newsweek.
No, we don't.
You
at
don't?
BusinessWeek, we don't do any of it.
Excuse me, BusinessWeek, how terrible.
Yeah, and we don't do it deliberately because, and it's very interesting. Traditionally, we don't do it precisely because we're afraid it will erode our role as editor, as curator. And I think that position may change over time as we begin to see ourselves as less of a voice of authority and more as a participant in a conversation with our audience. But at this point, the cultural legacy is not to merely follow our audience, but to help lead our audience in analysis and other things. So we don't test. We deliberately don't test. Interesting, huh?
Well, I think you're right. Being a leader is, incredibly important. And I think one of the problems with testing is that you do become more of a follower. Martha, for example, hates testing, hates cover testing. She goes kind of ballistic. But we do it anyway. And
you just don't tell her.
Well, we do, and she has such a hard time with it, and the cover tests are done online, and I think it's completely inappropriate because that's not the experience of buying a magazine.
Right.
The covers are about this big, they're maybe 3 inches by 4 inches, which is absurd, so, and any image that you look at 3 inches by 4 inches versus what it's going to be ultimately on the newsstand in the context of the newsstand, they're not even, they're just done one against another. They're not even done within the context of a newsstand.
Oh, wow.
So my feeling is that they're not done correctly, and yet they drive a lot of the decisions, because if there's a difference of 20 points or even 10 points, it's considered to be a lot. And who are these people who are looking at it and making the decision anyway? I have no idea who they are. It just,
you don't shape the pool? Or
well,
the
I'm sure that the business person, the circulation person shapes the pool. I have no idea how they do it.
Wait a minute. You have your circulation people doing a test.
Yeah.
Basically on an editorial decision.
That's right. Now you make the decision. You make the decision about which things to give them. I mean, you may try 20 different covers and come down to 2 covers that you like, and then you test those 2 covers.
So you're happy with whatever wins? Is that no, not really.
Not always. Not always.
Right.
I think one of the big questions for me around research is whether or not the whole research question is going to become moot over the next 5 or 10 years as we move through social media and the kind of Web 2.0 stuff to forms of kind of collaborative creation with customers that's very different from the things that we used to. I mean, this notion that we create something, show it to people, hope they like it, and then go sell it to them. I think it's changing to one where somehow these things get created in an environment that's more open and obviously not collaborative with everybody. You know that a very small number of people actually want to participate in that process, but there are people who do want to participate in that process, and we're clearly seeing it in the music industry already. We're beginning to see it in the film industry. We're starting to see. I mean, there's a company in Europe that's just launched which is putting up open source product designs, and then customers are voting on them, and then they're going and manufacturing the products. So I mean, well, it's doing T-shirts, but they're doing it with like fans and heaters, and I mean, these are real products. These are things where tooling's involved.
Yeah.
So there's, I have a feeling that our traditional thinking about consumer research is going to have to evolve to respond to that change.
Yeah. Yeah. How are we doing on time? Should we keep rolling a little bit?
One more question, and I have
Okay.
two mics here, and then the third person there, and then we'll have to probably end it. We'll see how.
Okay. Good.
Sure. I'm wondering, in a world that's increasingly flat, how American design is holding up, and are we losing an edge given that the very problems that you've outlined with, moving big corporations toward design thinking, if we're losing out to Italians, the Dutch, the Koreans. How do you feel about that?
I don't think of it as, personally don't think of it as a national issue. I'm a Brit working in America for a company that has offices all over the world, working for companies that are all over the world. So I tend not to, I mean, you know, and I know that's, I mean, other people's role is to think about it as a national competitiveness issue, but you know, I think it's got so complex now that it's actually very hard to talk about, you know, American design. I mean, you know, there are very successful American companies who are doing all their design in India. There are very successful European companies who are doing a ton of their design in America. So it's you know, in terms of design talent, we hire from pretty much every country in the world. I mean, my biggest problem is with the immigration authorities trying to get visas for people, which is, you know, a huge nightmare for us now. And it's not because we don't think there are good designers in America. There are plenty of good designers in America. We send them to Europe. You know, I mean, we do all. But it's so, yeah. I don't know that. I mean, I think if you take a broader view, you know, of America's kind of contribution to the kind of global pot of sort of intellectual property, if you like, I think America's still in pretty good shape. You know, I think some of that's to do with the fact that America still does control a lot of financing for new ideas, and you know, things like the venture capital community and the private equity community are pretty important, actually. I mean, we may not always love them, but they're pretty important in the sense that they finance the creation of new ideas, and you know, so much of that capital flow is still here, it's controlled here in the United States. So I think that's a pretty big advantage. You go look at the figures for software IP, and you know, America's still way ahead of the pack, even though companies like Samsung and others are kind of beginning to catch up. So there's still some pretty good stuff happening here.
Yeah, and I would agree with Tim. We have designers from every nationality, and we have design centers around the world. So I don't think of it as American design. For us, it's very much global. I don't know how about you guys?
Well, you know, we're such an American magazine. We don't cover European stories or anything like that. But we do have some wonderful Brits and, you know, people from all over America also working for us. The immigration is really tough because, and it does make you think twice about hiring somebody from outside the country, because you know you're going to have to wait for that person for more than 3 months, and you know you can't always wait that long. Yeah. And our company would personally like to be more global, and it's a big push from inside our company to do that.
I think, from my point of view, education and immigration have traditionally been the two major driving forces in America's prosperity, and at this point, I think they're both, you know, inadequate. And if we want to worry about something, these are the two things we should be worrying about, not only in terms of design, but all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Someone mentioned that you need a dean here, so I am one. I'm the dean at the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch. And I'm here in part because I want to create a conversation among all the faculty members who have been trained in their functional silos to be sure that design starts to be part of marketing, new product innovation, business and society, whatever place in the curriculum it might be. And one of the things I wanted to ask you all is that if I want to engage faculty and say, go to Cooper-Hewitt, go to MoMA, where else in our city should I send them to see some of the best examples of what would get them engaged and excited?
In New York?
That's easiest for me. That's where we are.
That's the local.
Go,
so.
Gail.
Actually, Paul, I was going to ask you that question. What do you think?
Well, I think a very good starting point would be the IDEO Select exhibition.
It is terrific.
It says it all. It really explains it very, very well indeed. I think that you know, that's obviously the one I would say.
I also think that designers get informed by things other than design. You know, you should go to art galleries and museums. You should go to the Poiret show. You know, it's one of the best shows in New York right now, from my perspective. So design it's a combination of so many influences.
There's also some of the great retail experiences in the world are here, and
that's very
you know, I think one of the reasons. I mean, we're finally, after years and years, getting to open an office here in New York, and I think one of the reasons that we're doing that is because, you know, there are certain activities that go on here in New York City that just don't go on anywhere else in the country, and you know, particularly around retail and other kinds of sort of experiences. I mean, entertainment experiences are unique here. There's you know, being based in New York, you're pretty fortunate, I think, in terms of getting a feel for how design can affect society and how it can affect the economy. It's a whole lot harder in certain other parts of the country to really get a sense of that. So just kind of live here, and you can't miss it, I think.
Yeah, it's true.
Very true.
Another question?
Yeah, so I'm the third person, I guess. So it's been a very interesting conversation for me to listen to, especially because you took us through fields that I'm also from the business school at NYU, and it's our field, you know, change management, organizational synergies, dealing with resistance, cross silo, bananas that we talk about every lecture, you know. And meanwhile, you were talking about this interface between design and, say, the business world, management, and all that. We supposedly, underlie the word supposedly, train people to be strategic thinkers. You were able to master the process of design thinking, which I don't know if I actually understand what does that really mean. But so question number one, what is it? Question number two.
We need another couple of hours.
Especially for the less gifted like myself. Question number two is, where does design thinking meet strategic thinking? Which I think some of you kind of touched on this. And maybe question number three, how does that get measured? Like, when do we know that this is successful?
I could give you a quick answer to the last part of it. There are a lot of indices now. There's one out of Britain, and we've run a couple in BusinessWeek, which show basically track a bunch of companies that use design thinking strategically, not just Apple, but Starwood and a bunch of others. Their stock price over 5 years against the S&P 500, for example, or the FTSE. And you can see it. You can see it on the bottom line. It's just there. So in a funny way, you would think that's the hardest part. That's the easiest part. And then you have to back into, so what do we, and then unpack, you know, what do we mean by design thinking? What are they doing? Which we really, I guess we don't have a whole lot of time to do now. But there is something very real, very measurable there.
I'll just put in another plug that Paul did, but the exhibit upstairs that IDEO did is about design thinking. And so I think if you go through that, like I said, we don't have time to kind of explain it all, but you'll get a great feel for design thinking, because that's what the entire exhibit is all about. That's the whole topic. It's terrific.
And there are more and more sources. I mean, you know, I think there are more and more good books being written about it, and you know, as we're all trying to kind of unpack what has been a relatively mysterious, you know, process. But as I said right at the beginning, I think there's still quite a long journey to go on. I mean, I often think that we're with design thinking now where the quality movement was in the sort of 50s, you know, where there were a few geniuses like Deming out there beginning to think that there was something there, but there was no real methodology yet. You know, Six Sigma hadn't appeared, and I'm certainly not suggesting we'll end up with a Six Sigma-like thing for design thinking. If we do, I think we're in real trouble. But I think there will be an equivalent kind of sort of formalization, if you will, under depth of understanding, academic research that supports the places where design thinking is really effective, both at a strategic and tactical level within organizations. I mean, I think that designers are just learning about how to be useful at a strategic level in organizations. I think we naturally do tend to think about broad brush things. We tend to think about the long time arcs. We tend to think about where things are going in the future, and we have an ability to visualize that and bring it to life, which is very powerful. And I think, you know, classically today, where companies are using design thinking most effectively at the very highest levels of strategy, it is to actually bring notions of strategy to life. It is to explore scenarios of how a company and organization might be in the future if it follows a certain technology strategy, or if it follows a certain market-facing strategy, a channel strategy, whatever it might be. And so that's been going on for a little while around some of the more kind of sort of thoughtful and insightful companies, I think. But we're even starting to see designers and design thinking get involved in the conception of that strategy itself. In sort of, it's an traditionally most companies have analyzed their way to to strategy. In the sort of classically, I think. And what design thinking can bring is a sort of an alternative way of thinking about strategy in a sort of a more of a generative way. Now the problem, if you only do that, then you have an awful lot of choices sat in front of you and you don't really know which one's better than another. So you need to combine that analytical thinking with that generative thinking, I believe, to make the most kind of robust strategy. And I think that's the opportunity. I think it's the opportunity for designers to be working with strong analytical business thinkers, to work together and to create powerful and appropriate strategy for companies.
We are really, really trying to deal with this at BusinessWeek and the magazine within the magazine, Inside Innovation. And there are a lot of case studies. We just did one on 3M. We did one earlier on symbol technology. It's a fascinating area. We're also sort of on this journey of trying to discover it, analyze it, talk about it, and delve deeply into it. So that's where we are, and I think that's probably a great way of ending, at least from my point of view, ending our great discussion here this morning. Is that good? Yeah.
I'd just like to thank our panelists very much indeed. I think we're really honored to have such a distinguished and experienced group of individuals from very different market sectors talking to us. We're also very lucky to have you, an audience, because you fired off some really great questions. If you want to continue this discussion, do go on to Cooper-Hewitt.org, because you can actually continue the social networking or the design thinking on the website. There's a special section there on the IDEO Selects exhibit sort of sub-site where you can continue this conversation. So thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
All right, here's what I want you guys to design.